when you weigh the right things on the right side and the wrong things on the wrong side.
Cosine equals 87 divided by 105, the square root of 105.
I mean, I can't always be their little girl.
If they're people that I really don't know that well, I try to get to know them. I mean, because I like to be friends with everybody.
Perhaps one of the greatest lessons of middle childhood is learning to get along with other children. During this time, we begin to understand that different people have different points of view. This, coupled with our ability to better communicate, can lead to an expanded development of empathy, altruism, and understanding others.
If I want to skate and she doesn't want to roller skate, then we won't roller skate. We'd probably do something else.
Or because of immaturity in communicating and self-control, displays of hostility and aggression toward others can grow.
If you're not her friend, she'll just make fun of you and everything. He does tell me to shut up a lot. And I don't like it, so I just beat him up. She has an attitude problem.
Why do some children in middle childhood learn to get along with others, while others do not?
The next slide.
At the heart of prosocial behavior, many researchers believe, is our development of empathy, altruism, and selfless caring for others. Central to this is understanding how children interpret the feelings of others.
Almost like Christmas.
Okay. And in this next slide, he's now ready to blow out his candles on his delicious birthday cake before he opens many presents. And the question is, how does the boy in the picture feel?
He's happy.
One of the problems in empathy, in trying to understand it, is how do you measure it? Because empathy is an internal response. It takes place in your head and your heart. For example, if you want to observe prosocial behavior, you can observe it. If you want to observe empathy, you have to ask the person questions, or you have to give them certain kinds of tests.
Bob and I are we're part of a study that's interested in how children your age think and feel about themselves and other people. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to play a game kind of like telephone. Has anyone ever played telephone? All right, but the difference with this game is that we're just going to use our faces, just from here up, to let people know how we're feeling, okay? Okay, you ready, Sam? Yeah. Oh, I got a good one. Okay. Joy. Okay. Pass it on. Okay. What do you think that was?
Laughing.
That's really good. That's really close. I gave you a kind of a hard one. It was joyful. That's a hard one.
From studies such as this have come findings that empathy, indeed, affects many aspects of middle childhood development.
If you're an empathic person, there's less likelihood for you to hurt another person. And one of the things that we found as a consequence of our field programs with empathy training curricula is that not only did children's aggression go down and prosocial behavior go up, but also the children's achievement went up. My research looking at parent behavior and child behavior and their relationship suggests that empathy in girls emerges in contexts that are very healthy, that are very positive, when there's a good relationship of the daughter with the mother.
I'm really impressed. You want to give this to Deanna? Give it to Deanna.
Like many girls, for 11-year-old Deanna, a history of a caring relationship with her mother has helped foster her developing sense of empathy.
Empathic mothers have empathic daughters. Mothers who are nurturant, provide autonomy experiences for their children, allow their children to be independent, are less punitive, have children who are more empathic and more pro-social.
That's a good boy.
I think the one thing in her nature that is the most obvious and one of her best features is that she was always thinking of other people. In some ways, it's harmful for her because when she's thinking about other people, she doesn't think about herself. She's often afraid to impose on anybody else. But at the same time, that's a very endearing feature. Come on, come on.
Enriching Deanna's developing sense of empathy is a special family situation. A younger brother with autism.
Having a brother like Justin is different because he doesn't do all the other things that other brothers do. He's really special in his own way, and he's good to have a brother because he's really nice. He's really athletic because he could climb trees. He used to climb over that.
Deanna, I think, often will try to explain to her friends that he's a little boy. He's a little boy that likes to do a lot of the same things that your little brother does. Sometimes he acts differently.
When my friends are here for the first time, if they ask, I usually tell them that Justin's autistic, and if they don't know what that means, then I'll tell them that he doesn't have any speech, and he doesn't know as much as ordinary people would.
We think, and there's research to support us, that empathy is related to pro-social behavior, that it's related inversely to negative behavior. It seems to play a role in altruism, seems to be correlated with, at least for girls, for reading and spelling, probably has a role in communication. Over the years, some theorists have even posited that empathy might be the core factor in social interactions and in society. I mean, what keeps a society together? Well, maybe empathy plays a role.
He needs a hug. He just needs some hugging. Ooh, look at all these hugs. Look at all these hugs. Scott, you've got to get this room cleaned up. You're not having any friends over until this room is cleaned up. I told you earlier to get it cleaned up. Now take your shorts, your shirt, put them in a dirty clothes hamper, hang your jacket up. Take these books, put them on your bookshelf. And what about this game?
Mikey had that game in here. I had nothing to do with that.
Well, you decide what to do with the game, but you're not having any friends over until your room is clean.
One of the most common themes in the study of child development is the notion that parents socialize their children, that they direct their children's behavior. And therefore, for a long time, psychologists have spent a lot of time looking at what they call compliance. That is, when a parent tells a child what to do, the kid either does it or doesn't do it, and we have this notion they should be doing it. I'm interested, my team is interested in conflict, because we see that as changing the focus in child development, not just looking at what mothers or what parents do to make their kids behave, but what's happening between parents and kids to influence their relationship. The notion that we have when we look at conflict is that conflict is an okay behavior, that in fact it's often good to disagree, that children need to learn to disagree, obviously, in socially appropriate ways.
We think now that it's not so important whether conflict occurs or not, but how the conflict is handled. And if conflicts are handled by a responsive, open attitude in the family, where the child's opinion is listened to and respected, even if it's not adopted by the family as the way things are going to be, then conflict can actually play a very positive role in moving children to new levels of maturity.
Scott, this looks great.
Conflict may actually be essential. The critical factor is how it's handled.
I think children get a chance to see models in action when they look at other people, when they look at their parents or when they look at siblings, or even when they watch their friends. They get a chance to see how people treat other people. Do they treat people with compassion and with respect, or instead do they see people being treated harshly and with insensitivity and indifference to other people's needs? So I think even when a child is watching, say, his or her parents interacting either between themselves or with their adult friends, children really are picking up messages about how you interact with other people in the world.
If something's on your mind, at least talk to me about it and not ignore me.
I don't ignore you.
You do ignore me.
I don't ignore you.
Well, what do you...
While children are clearly learning as they watch adults argue, what they are learning may depend on how the argument is conducted.
It takes me forever. I have to ask you 5 times before you actually answer me, and I feel like this nagging little kid.
To answer the question of the effect of marital distress and marital conflict styles on children, we asked families to come into our laboratory and take part in a series of interactions between various family members. In one interaction, we had couples come in and discuss areas of conflict or areas of disagreement in their relationship. And while they were having this discussion, we videotaped them and monitored their physiological arousal and reactivity to each other during the conversation.
Okay. So your last one, this is your ground, it's going to go. Okay. There you go.
The videotape data as well as the physiological data are synchronized in time so that we can actually look at specific instances when couples are angry at each other, for example, and look at what's going on physiologically during the anger.
I'm talking about when we're together, I just wish we would make an effort about, if we're together, let's be together, you know? I just...
Well, I mean, I think it goes both ways, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, are you asking what do you...
The kinds of things that we're interested in are the emotional communication that couples are conveying to each other during the conversation. Are they being angry? Are they being insulting and contemptuous? Are they trying to resolve conflict by soothing each other and being humorous or affectionate and caring towards each other?
It makes me feel like what I have to say isn't important, and what you're thinking about, whatever's on your mind, is more important.
One of our central questions is, how does marital discord and marital conflict affect children? A classic hypothesis in this area is that when couples aren't getting along very well, it affects the quality of their parenting, and that in turn affects children's social relationships and their emotional development. That was one of the areas that we looked at. The other concern of ours, the other question we have, is whether the particular ways in which couples argue tell us anything about their children's well-being.
To compare arguing and parenting styles, researchers also examined the nature of the parent-child interaction by designing a potentially stressful teaching situation.
The particular teaching task that we used involved the parents teaching the child how to play a video game that the parents had previously learned. One of the challenges that we faced in this research was creating a situation that was both naturalistic as well as allowed us to get good recordings of the children's physiological reactivity and their emotional expressions. In order to do so, we needed the children to remain seated through our laboratory procedures, which is a difficult task when you're dealing with rather young children. In order to get these recordings, we devised a fantasy theme for the children around them being astronauts. And when they came into the laboratory, they put on a spacesuit and got into the space capsule, and all our procedures occurred in the space capsule.
Maybe that won't
You
work.
need to shoot them before they get to the tube. That's good. That's good.
Oop, see, now we don't have any teeth over there, so don't worry about those. Did you see? See how it's where our teeth are is where we have to protect.
We also contacted families 3 years later to get an assessment of how well the children were doing at that time. We asked parents, as well as the children's teachers, to give us some indication whether the children were showing any signs of behavior problems. We did not find support for one of the classic hypotheses in this area, which is that marital conflict affects the way in which couples interact with their children, and that this in turn predicts how well the children will be faring at a later point in time. Instead, what we found was that marital conflict and marital conflict resolution styles directly predicts teachers' ratings of internalizing and externalizing behaviors 3 years later.
I don't like it when we sit down to dinner, it's like we're playing these roles or something, you know? It's like we're not even married. I mean, why did we get married in the first place?
For example, one of the patterns that we found is that when couples, and particularly when the wives, use a great deal of contempt when they're resolving marital disagreement. In other words, when they insult their spouse or mock them or make character assassination kinds of statements which actually communicate a great deal of lack of respect towards their spouse or assault their personality or something that they hold dear to them. When couples engage in a lot of those types of behaviors, teachers report 3 years later that the children are showing signs of aggression, acting out kinds of behaviors.
That's fine with me.
As long as you want to deal with mortgage payments?
Well, let's do it together.
Deal with investments?
Let's do it together.
The other pattern that we found is when couples show a lot of anger, that is, particularly when husbands are angry during the marital interaction, and this ranges from annoyance to irritation to yelling, raising their voices, and getting a lot more heated than that. When couples, when husbands, that is, engage in a lot of anger during marital disagreement, 3 years later, teachers report that these children are showing signs of internalizing kinds of problems, namely they're more depressed, more anxious, reporting more somatic kinds of problems. One of the messages of this research to parents is that the way in which they resolve conflict with their spouse has developmental consequences for their child. When they resolve conflict in a destructive manner, it's associated with a range of negative behaviors in their child.
Parents, of course, aren't the only influence in the home.
No, I must admit, I'm not really the world's greatest cook.
He's terrible.
Do you guys feel like having a snack?
Okay. So bad. Dad forgot to put any green, and the whole thing came out flat like a pancake.
No.
As we all know, television is a very popular way of spending time for children of all ages and adults. Most kids spend 2, 3, 4 hours a day, more time than in school, watching TV. And a lot of what they watch, most of what they watch, isn't intended to teach them, but most of them do learn some things from it. They take some of the content seriously, and they consider it as something to think about and to incorporate into their lives at various times. I've been interested for 25 or 30 years now in how children make sense of television and what kinds of an impact it can have.
To help determine this impact, researchers have attempted to understand how the aggressive and pro-social content of the programming relates to children's behavior.
Sometimes when you're watching a TV show, there'll be a part about, you know, someone's mad or someone's sad or
or there's a problem in a family, and sometimes the TV shows will show you one way of how to behave in that situation, how to solve the problem. Have you ever seen a TV show where something like that has happened? Gives you a good idea about what to do in a hard situation?
On The Simpsons, when Bart doesn't get along with Maggie, and they always fight a lot, and the mom tells them to stop, and they still don't. They don't get along like me. I don't get along with my brother.
So does watching The Simpsons give you an idea about what to do when you don't get along with your brother? What does it show you to do?
I should just go away.
What you see in studies where you look at how much kids watch more aggressive programming or less aggressive programming is that their tendency towards one or the other kind of solution tends to be slanted in the direction of the programming. So kids who have higher diets, either because they're administered experimentally or because it occurs naturally, of aggressive programming, where aggression is the way you solve problems, are more likely to choose that kind of a solution in everyday circumstances of their own, either in actual everyday behavior or in paper and pencil measures of it. Actually, unfortunately, the evidence for the effects of aggressive content is stronger, I think, than the evidence for the effects of pro-social content.
Hey, I was watching that.
You two are something else.
Children will imitate interesting actions and interesting words, particularly if those seem to get what kids might want, like get toys that they want, or if the actions are carried out by people who seem to have power and status. It doesn't matter so much whether or not the person is exactly like you, although that helps, but what's more important is that the actions seem to have good effects and that they're carried out by people with status and power. So there are all those kinds of impacts of regular, everyday, sit in your living room or your den or your bedroom now and watch TV, viewing all those kinds of effects on normal child development in our culture. The effects in general are small. They don't determine who the child is, but actually the literature on schooling and on parents shows also that no one thing seems to be the determining factor for how a child develops.
She changed the channel on me. We're watching the other show.
Come on, you guys. Grabbing the remote from each other is not the right thing to do.
A telling measure of a child's ability to get along with other children is the number of friends a child has.
We've been interested in different reasons why children might get disliked or rejected by their peers in school, and there's definitely one subgroup that a number of researchers have identified are children who are quite aggressive toward other kids. That is, they're hurtful. They either are physically aggressive or they're verbally abusive toward other children, and that's a very large group of this group that we're talking about, of kids who have difficulties. But there's also a group of kids who, interestingly, are actually not terribly negative, at least in the sense of being aggressive toward other kids. But these children, rather, are more submissive and withdrawn, and very lacking, though, in positive skills. In fact, I'd say one thing that both groups, the aggressive group and the submissive group, have in common is lacking knowledge of how to interact in more positive kinds of ways with children. When researchers go into classrooms and study children's friendships, they typically use something that's called a sociometric measure. This is a measure where you ask children to indicate who their best friends are in the group, or to rate how much they like to play with various members of the group. These questions, these kinds of measures, are very helpful in learning something about the picture of children's social relationships in class, and they help us to identify those children who are having special problems with their friendship relations. In a way, there are two kinds of children who you might think of as unpopular in classrooms. There are children who don't have friends but are fairly well accepted by other kids. These are children, if you went in and you gave a sociometric measure, you might find nobody names them as a friend, but actually these kids are not disliked by other children. They're pretty well liked. It just so happens that nobody names them as a friend. Then there's another kind of child who you might call a rejected child or a highly disliked child. And this child not only is relatively lacking in friends, but also the other children really don't want to play with the child. What researchers are finding is that these two groups of children seem to differ a lot in terms of how at risk they are for later problems. rejected children are more likely to drop out of school. They're more likely to have achievement problems. They're more likely to be lonely. They seem to be more likely later in life to run into problems related to delinquency or criminality. We don't have any evidence really that this other kind of child, this more neglected child, is really at much risk. In fact, if you go back to a school a year later and just find out who's well-liked in a classroom, you'll find that the child who is sociometrically neglected the year before is most likely doing just fine a year later, whereas half of the children who were sociometrically rejected the year before are still rejected a year later.
No. Look and see. Do you know about the number 2 in your thesaurus?
I'm very encouraged by the success that researchers are having in helping children who have friendship problems. Children can be taught to learn how to solve problems, social problems, more effectively. They can learn particular ways of interacting in groups that make it more fun for themselves and for other children. We know that perhaps as many as half of the children who are directly taught social interaction skills make substantial gains in terms of how well the other children like them in the group. At the same time, I think we're all struck by the fact that we don't really have a complete understanding yet about how to help kids who are having friendship problems. There's a lot of different kinds of kids out there. There are kids who are quite physically aggressive, and there are other kids who are very submissive and shy and withdrawn in their interaction patterns. And it might be that we're going to need different kinds of approaches for helping kids who have different sorts of problems.
Getting along with others, perhaps the central issue of middle childhood, involves every area of development. Children learn how to think about needs of others, how to manage difficult emotions, how to resolve conflict, and how to accept and be accepted by others. At home, in school, and in the larger world, important human influences are all around, helping to shape the growing child.